Let's talk about Toni Morrison briefly, and then we'll get to the gem. So Toni Morrison is somebody that, I'm not going to claim falsely. I think I read her briefly in college, but she is someone who, I will take the sadness of this day actually as an opportunity to remind myself to read her. Incredibly important novelist, incredibly important thinker, contributor in the American scene. Have either of you guys read much of Toni Morrison?
I've read jazz as far as her fiction goes, but what I'm most familiar with as part of your research for Literary Hangover is her book Plain in the Dark: Whiteness and the Literary Imagination, which is I don't know if people have read Ralph Ellison's now I'm blanking the name of that book. Invisible Man. But there's a scene in that book where they're making white paint, and the key ingredient for that white paint is actually black paint. Mm-hmm. And Toni Morrison really gets at that, and how like throughout American literature, like the role that blackness plays is a defining thing. And she understood that as well as anybody I think that's ever lived in this country.
So I just want to say, obviously, I don't want to shoehorn a lot into this, and there's a lot more to say about the terrorism that we saw in El Paso, and I use that word advisedly with some ambiguity, frankly, because I would like to shrink the use of that word. But frankly, that meets any objective definition of how you would use that word. I was on the Hill this morning. I apologize in advance for the bad sound quality, but it was a very good interview, and there's no contradiction. In fact, not only is there no contradiction between understanding alienation, the material roots, the capitalist byproducts, when Bill Fletcher Jr. calls right-wing populism the herpes of capitalism. Not only is there no contradiction between understanding the history and the reality of white supremacy and those conditions. In fact, understanding that synthesis and the mutuality of that relationship is essential to any proper strategy to defeat it and unwind it in society. And this is part of that broader education process. Let's play that clip from Toni Morrison now.
This is her in 1993 on Charlie Rose.
I take your race away, and there you are, all strung out, and all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself? These are the questions. Part of it is, yes, the victim, how terrible it has been for black people.
You don't like that.
I'm not a victim. I refuse to be one.
And the victim is the other person who is morally inferior and
that's a
has
serious
to hold
question.
on to
of course
racism
if you
to
have
somehow
to hold
for his or her own self-esteem and definition.
If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it.
And right. And that's also, that's also in Sartre's essay on anti-Semitism. And you can take it in either direction. There's the idea when you read someone like Christian Piccolini and you see a redemption arc, which needs to be in this too for everybody, because that's the only, it's the only possibility, right? Whether we're talking about ISIS or white terrorists, white supremacist terrorists. So there's one way of recognizing the absolute truth of what she's saying and recognizing Jesus Christ. That's a really broken person that needs to be exited and de-radicalized and understood in a broader context, as much as we may hate and be disgusted by them. And then there is the other reality that, is driven through in the contempt. There shouldn't be contempt for individuals, but the contempt in the broader discourse for the pathetic, small insecurity that does drive that. That you have no healthy group identity. You have no individual creativity and distinctness. And whether you're doing the upmarket IQ quackery or the downmarket thuggery, you're substituting nothing that you have to latch on to this grotesque evil history. She's absolutely right. What is,
I don't know if this is kind of loosely related, but we can move on if we want to.
no, play. How long is it?
Just a couple minutes. This is from, speaking of things everybody should read, ingest, I guess, in terms of culture. This debate between William F. Buckley and James Baldwin is amazing.
James Baldwin with the patience of the saint.
I mean, this
debate.
is
and
maybe,
literally, I mean, that's a cliche, but seriously,
this is one of the best debate performances. If you're concerned about debate performances and being owned and that sort of thing, this is maybe I can't think of anybody who tops Baldwin here, but it talks about a similar sort of topic here.
Let's take a minute of that.
It's one system of reality. It would seem to me that the proposition before the House, if I put it that way, is the American dream at the expense of the American Negro, or the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro, is a question hideously loaded, and that one's response to that question, or one's reaction to that question, has to depend on an effect on where you find yourself in the world, what your sense of reality is, what your system of reality is. That is, it depends on assumptions which we hold so deeply as to be scarcely aware of them. A white South African, or a Mississippi sharecropper, or a Mississippi sheriff, or a Frenchman driven out of Algeria, all have, at bottom, a system of reality which compels them to, for example, in the case of the French exile from Algeria, to defend French reasons for having ruled Algeria. The Mississippi or the Alabama sheriff, who really does believe when he's facing a Negro boy or girl, that this woman, this man, this child, must be insane to attack the system to which he owes his entire identity. Of course, for such a person, the proposition of which we're trying to discuss here tonight does not exist. And on the other hand, I have to speak as one of the people who've been most attacked by what we must now here call the Western or the European system of reality. What white people in the world, because the doctrine of white supremacy, I hate to say it here, comes from Europe. That's how it got to America.
All right. So, yes. And again, the idea that there is any distinction between understanding that and the material relationships and realities is complete falsehood. And anybody who's playing that game on either extreme, I've seen, I see the dumb, woke, hectoring takes, which I will still keep condemning and arguing against any form of essentialism, all of that toxicity, the ridiculous, when someone tweets out and says loneliness is part of it and people object to that, ridiculous. Objectively, loneliness is part of it. And then I see some, random type, YouTube, Twitter pundits saying that, this is a complete distraction and this doesn't matter. Our history, the racial realities of this country, nonsense. Nonsense. All nonsense. All two poles of stupidity which need to be transcended and synthesized to get to appropriate action, transcendence, and solutions. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.